Imagine this. You wake up one morning and everything you've ever wanted is finally yours. The apartment with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city. The career that makes people lean in at dinner parties when you describe it. The relationship you once ached for during long sleepless nights. The wardrobe, the devices, the subscriptions, the lifestyle. All of it exactly as you once pictured it when you were younger and hungry and certain that this was the shape happiness would take. Now imagine that you feel nothing. Not gratitude, not relief, not the warm, settling satisfaction you rehearsed in your mind 1,000 times. Just a quiet, unsettling flatness, like a song you listened to so many times the melody finally stopped meaning anything. You stand at the window, coffee in hand, skyline bleeding orange at the edges, and somewhere deep in your chest, beneath the silence, a small voice asks a question you are not ready to answer. Is this it? Today, we begin a deep exploration of a truth that has echoed through Buddhist philosophy for centuries. The less you want, the freer your mind becomes. Stay with me until the end of this journey, because the final realization we will uncover is the most important and powerful of all, and it has the potential to transform how you experience life at its very core. Buddhist minimalism is often misunderstood. It is not about poverty, isolation, or rejecting the world. It is not about forcing yourself to desire nothing or living an austere life devoid of beauty and comfort. At its essence, Buddhist minimalism is about understanding the mechanics of desire and recognizing how attachment quietly shapes your suffering. In a world that constantly tells you that more is better, that happiness is always one step ahead, Buddhist wisdom offers a radically different perspective. It suggests that freedom does not come from accumulation, but from discernment, from knowing what is essential and letting go of what is not. This insight has influenced not only spiritual traditions, but also modern psychology, neuroscience, and philosophies of well-being. Before we go further, take a moment to support this space. If these ideas resonate with you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share this video with someone who feels overwhelmed or trapped by the pressures of modern life, and write your reflections in the comments. Throughout this journey, unexpected realizations will emerge, and by the end, you may find that your relationship with desire, success, and even happiness itself has quietly but profoundly shifted. At the heart of Buddhist teaching lies a simple and unsettling observation. Suffering does not arise from what we lack, but from what we cling to. This is not a story about failure. This is a story about the people who succeeded and discovered that success had left a door open to something far more terrifying than struggle. It is the story of a trap so elegantly constructed, so perfectly disguised as progress and aspiration and self-improvement, that most people will live and die inside it without ever once suspecting that the walls exist. We live in a civilization architecturally designed around one central, unquestioned assumption, that more is the direction of better. More choice, more stimulation, more achievement, more experience, more identity, more comfort, more novelty. Every algorithm, every advertisement, every motivational message whispered into your earbuds on a morning run is engineered around this assumption with the precision of a religion. Want more, achieve more, become more. And if you ever feel empty, if the acquisition of everything you desired somehow fails to fill the space inside you, the prescribed solution is always the same. Want something better, something bigger, something newer. But what if the prescription is the disease? What if the very mechanism of wanting, not the failure to satisfy it, but the wanting itself, is the thing quietly dismantling your peace, your clarity, your capacity to be present in your own life? What if the Buddhist monks who stripped themselves of everything and sat in silence weren't retreating from the world, but had discovered something about the human mind that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to confirm with trembling reluctance? Consider the mathematics of desire for just a moment.
Every time you want something you don't have, your mind is splitting itself in two, one half anchored in the present, the other projected into an imagined future where the wanting has been resolved. You are never fully here. You are always, to some degree, elsewhere. And the more you want, the more fragmented your consciousness becomes, scattered across 100 imagined futures, 1,000 unresolved longings, a relentless background hum of not yet, not enough, not quite. Now ask yourself this: when was the last time your mind was truly quiet, not distracted into silence by a screen or a substance, not exhausted into stillness, but genuinely, freely, weightlessly at rest? When did you last experience a moment that needed nothing added to it to feel complete? If you are struggling to remember, that is not an accident. There is a philosophy, ancient, radical, and profoundly misunderstood, that begins not with the question of how to get what you want, but with a far more dangerous question: what would you become if you stopped wanting it? It does not promise comfort. It does not promise happiness in any form you currently recognize. What it promises is the return of your own mind. And before you can understand how to reclaim it, you first need to understand exactly how it was taken and why you helped them do it.
Nobody told you that you were being conditioned. That is precisely what makes it so effective. From the moment you were old enough to understand language, the world began its quiet work on you, not through force, not through obvious manipulation, but through something far more insidious: repetition. You were shown thousands upon thousands of times through television screens and shopping aisles and the aspirational lives of people around you that desire was not merely natural, but virtuous, that to want was to be alive, that ambition was the highest expression of a human being, and that the person who wanted the most, who chased the hardest, who accumulated with the greatest urgency, that person was winning. What you were never shown was the cost. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer was one of the first Western thinkers to articulate what Buddhist philosophy had understood for millennia: that the will, the raw driving force of human desire, is not your friend. It is a blind, insatiable engine that uses your consciousness as its instrument. Schopenhauer observed that desire follows a merciless cycle. You want something, you suffer in the wanting, you briefly experience relief upon getting it, and then almost immediately a new want rises to take its place. There is no destination, there is only the motion, and the motion, he argued, is suffering dressed as purpose. This was not pessimism, it was diagnosis. Carl Jung, centuries later, would approach the same wound from a different angle. He identified what he called the shadow, the unconscious repository of everything we reject, suppress, and refuse to examine about ourselves. Jung observed that much of what we desire is not genuinely our own longing, it is the shadow speaking. We pursue status because we fear insignificance. We accumulate because we are trying to silence an ancient wordless terror of emptiness. We fill our lives with wanting because the alternative, sitting quietly with who we actually are, stripped of achievement and acquisition, is more confronting than any external struggle we could manufacture. Modern psychology has given this phenomenon a clinical vocabulary. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation, the mind's ruthless tendency to normalize every gain, to raise the baseline of expectation until yesterday's extraordinary becomes today's insufficient. Brain imaging studies have shown that the anticipation of a reward activates the dopamine system far more powerfully than the reward itself. In other words, your brain is neurologically engineered to make the wanting feel more alive than the having. You are not chasing satisfaction, you are chasing the neurochemical sensation of the chase. Jean-Paul Sartre, sitting in the smoky cafes of post-war Paris, described human consciousness as perpetually haunted by lack, a fundamental incompleteness that we spend our entire lives trying to resolve through external acquisition, relationship, ideology, and identity.
For Sartre, this was the tragic irony of human freedom, that we are condemned not only to choose, but to want, endlessly and without resolution, because the very structure of consciousness is built around absence. And yet, and here is where it becomes deeply uncomfortable, none of these thinkers, none of this philosophy, none of this accumulated psychological wisdom has made the slightest measurable dent in the architecture of modern desire. If anything, the machinery has accelerated. The stimulation is faster. The gap between wanting and the next wanting has been compressed to almost nothing, engineered by entire industries whose singular purpose is to ensure that you never, not for a single unguarded moment, feel complete. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps and emerged with a philosophy forged in the absolute extremity of human suffering, wrote that the primary human drive is not pleasure, not power, but meaning. And yet he also observed something chilling, that when meaning is absent, human beings will compulsively substitute stimulation. That restlessness, that relentless hunger for the next thing is not ambition, it is the sound of a mind that has lost its center, spinning faster and faster in the hope that velocity will feel like direction. You have felt this, perhaps you feel it right now. The question is not whether the trap exists, the question is how deep inside it you already are, and whether you have yet begun to understand what it is quietly costing you. Because the price is not paid all at once, it is paid in increments so small you barely notice each one. It is paid in the quality of your attention, in the depth of your presence, in the slow, almost imperceptible erosion of your capacity for stillness, until one day you realize that silence no longer feels like rest, but like a threat. And that realization, as unsettling as it is only the beginning of what has been taken.
You do not notice it happening. That is the most dangerous thing about it. It does not arrive like a crisis, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. It does not announce itself the way grief does, or failure, or loss. It moves the way water moves through stone, slowly, invisibly, reshaping the landscape of your inner life so gradually that by the time you register the change, you can no longer remember what the original terrain looked like. This is how unchecked desire operates, not as a storm, but as a slow erosion. And what it erodes with patient, relentless precision is the very faculty you need most to recognize it, your capacity for present moment awareness. Neuroscientists call it default mode network activation, the brain's tendency, when not engaged in a specific task, to immediately begin wandering, to rehearse the past, to simulate the future, to generate a continuous internal narrative of what was, what is not, and what should be. Research from Harvard University found that people spend nearly 47% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they are currently doing. Nearly half of your conscious life is spent elsewhere. And critically, the same study found that this mental wandering, regardless of where the mind travels, is consistently correlated with lower reported happiness than being present, even when the activity itself is mundane. Your mind has been trained to be perpetually dissatisfied with now. This is not a personal failing. It is the predictable outcome of a cultural operating system that has been running the same program for decades, one that treats the present moment not as the site of life, but merely as the launching pad for the next acquisition, the next goal, the next version of yourself that will finally be enough. Every notification is a small vote against presence. Every scroll is a quiet training session in the art of never arriving. Every advertisement is a carefully engineered argument that where you are right now is insufficient, that happiness is not here, but there, just beyond the next purchase, the next achievement, the next transformation. And the consequences reach far deeper than restlessness.
Psychologists have identified a phenomenon known as ego depletion, the observation that willpower, decision-making capacity, and cognitive clarity are finite resources that drain with use. What is less commonly discussed is how desire itself accelerates this depletion. Every unresolved want occupies cognitive bandwidth. Every object of craving that sits in the background of your awareness, the promotion you haven't received, the relationship you haven't repaired, the life you imagine existing somewhere parallel to the one you're living, each of these is a quiet drain on the mental resources you need for clarity, creativity, and genuine connection. The Buddhists had a word for this, accumulated mental noise, papanka, often translated as mental proliferation, the mind's tendency to take a single perception and spin it outward into an elaborate web of association, judgment, craving, and aversion. A single moment of wanting becomes a narrative. The narrative becomes an identity. The identity becomes a prison. And the prisoner, having lived inside long enough, begins to mistake the walls for the world. Consider what this does to your relationships. When you are perpetually oriented toward what you lack, toward the next thing, toward an imagined better version of your circumstances, the people in front of you become supporting characters in your own internal drama, rather than full human beings worthy of your complete attention. You are physically present, but psychologically absent, and the people who love you can feel the difference even when they cannot name it. Desire, in its chronic, unexamined form, does not just steal your peace, it steals your intimacy, your depth, your capacity to be genuinely moved by the unremarkable beauty of an ordinary moment. And at the civilizational level, the consequences scale with terrifying clarity. Societies organized entirely around the stimulation and monetization of desire produce not flourishing but exhaustion, collective burnout dressed in the language of productivity and growth. The anxiety epidemic is not incidental to consumer culture, it is its most honest output. When an entire civilization is architecturally arranged to ensure that no one ever feels complete, the psychological toll is not a side effect, it is the business model. You were not born restless, you were taught to be. And somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the wanting and the scrolling and the relentless forward motion of a life spent perpetually arriving, there is a version of you that has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to finally stop long enough to remember what stillness feels like. The question is whether you are ready to make that choice, because it will require something the modern world has convinced you is weakness. It will require you to want less.
Here is the most radical thing you can do in the modern world. Not protest, not disruption, not the loud performative rejection of systems and structures that the internet rewards with attention and applause. The most radical act available to you right now, the one that strikes at the very root of the machinery that has been quietly colonizing your consciousness, is this: sit down, want nothing, and stay there. Watch how uncomfortable that makes you. Watch how quickly the mind reaches for something, a phone, a thought, a plan, a memory, a distraction dressed as productivity. Watch how the silence almost immediately begins to feel like a problem that needs solving. That discomfort, that reflexive lunge toward stimulation, is not a personality trait. It is the withdrawal symptom of a mind that has been kept in a state of perpetual craving for so long that stillness has come to feel like deprivation. You are not restless by nature, you are restless by training, and that distinction matters enormously, because what has been trained can be untrained. The Buddha did not teach renunciation as punishment, he taught it as revelation. When Siddhartha Gautama abandoned the palace, the luxury, the comfort, the carefully constructed world of sensory satisfaction his father had built around him, he was not performing an act of self-denial. He was conducting the most rigorous philosophical experiment in human history. He was asking, what remains when everything the world says you need is removed? And what he discovered, after years of searching, was not emptiness. It was a clarity so complete, so luminous, that every previous state of mind, including the pleasures of the palace, revealed themselves as the pale, flickering shadows they had always been. This is the insight that the Pali texts call nekama, the freedom that arises not from having, but from releasing. And it is not reserved for monks. It is not contingent on robes or monasteries or the dramatic abandonment of modern life. It is available in the texture of an ordinary Tuesday, if you know how to look. The Stoic philosophers understood this too, approaching the same truth from the western edge of the ancient world. Marcus Aurelius, ruling the most powerful empire on earth, wrote in private journals, never intended for public eyes, that the object of life was not the expansion of want, but the contraction of it, the deliberate, disciplined practice of needing less, expecting less, and thereby being disturbed by less. He called it amor fati, the love of what is. Not resignation, not passivity, but a radical reorientation of desire away from the imagined and toward the actual. Henry David Thoreau walked this same path in the 19th century when he retreated to Walden Pond and stripped his life down to its essential components, not to escape life, but to finally encounter it without the noise of unnecessary wanting obscuring the signal. What he found was not poverty of experience, but a richness so concentrated, so immediate, that he later wrote that he had lived more deeply in those 2 years than most men live in a lifetime. The reduction was not the sacrifice, the reduction was the revelation. Modern neuroscience now offers a physiological explanation for what these figures experienced intuitively. Studies on mindfulness and meditation, practices fundamentally rooted in the cultivation of non-attachment, consistently show measurable reductions in activity in the brain's default mode network, the same system responsible for the restless, wanting, narrative-generating mental wandering that consumes nearly half your conscious life. When you train the mind to release its grip on desire, even temporarily, the brain does not go dark. It becomes more active in the regions associated with present moment awareness, empathy, and what researchers describe as a baseline sense of well-being independent of external circumstance. In other words, the freedom the Buddhists described is not metaphorical, it is neurological. But here is where the rebellion becomes personal, and where most people quietly retreat. Because releasing desire does not mean releasing engagement. It does not mean indifference, apathy, or the hollow detachment of someone who has simply stopped caring. The Buddhist concept of upekkha, equanimity, is not the absence of feeling. It is feeling without the tyranny of clinging. It is the capacity to be fully present with joy without desperately gripping it, and fully present with sorrow without being destroyed by it. It is the difference between swimming in the ocean and being drowned by it. You can want things, you can pursue things, you can build, create, love, and strive with everything you have. The rebellion is not against action. It is the belief that your wholeness depends on the outcome. It is the radical, quietly revolutionary act of doing everything fully and needing nothing from it to feel complete. That single shift from grasping to engaging, from needing to choosing, changes everything. Not the circumstances of your life, but the quality of your experience of it. And in the end, that is the only thing that was ever actually yours to change. But even this, even the liberation of equanimity, even the neuroscience of non-attachment, even the wisdom of Aurelius and the Buddha and Thoreau, distilled into a single actionable insight, is not yet the deepest layer of this truth. There is one final realization waiting beneath all of it, one that reframes not just how you relate to desire, but how you understand the very nature of the self that has been doing all the wanting. And it is the one that changes everything.
There is a question that has haunted philosophy since the very first human being looked inward and asked it, and it is the question that all of this, every layer of this journey, has been quietly building toward. Who is the one who wants? Not what do you want, not why do you want it, but who or what is the entity at the center of all this wanting? Because here is the realization that the Buddhist tradition points toward with every teaching, every practice, every moment of cultivated stillness. The realization that Western philosophy has circled without landing, that neuroscience is only now beginning to approach with the appropriate mixture of rigor and humility. The self that you believe to be doing the wanting, the solid, continuous, sovereign I at the center of your experience, is not what you think it is. This is not abstract philosophy. Stay with it. You have spent your entire life operating under an assumption so foundational, so thoroughly embedded in every thought and feeling and decision you have ever made, that it has never once occurred to you to question it. The assumption that there is a stable, unified, essential you, a self that persists across time, that has needs and preferences and desires, that is incomplete until those desires are met. Every act of wanting flows from this assumption. Every purchase, every ambition, every relationship pursued as a solution to loneliness, all of it rests on the bedrock belief that there is a fixed self that needs completing. But what if that self is a construction? If the self is not a fixed entity, but a fluid process, then the things you believe you need to complete it are solutions to a problem that does not exist in the form you imagined. You have been spending your life trying to fill a vessel that has no bottom, not because the world has failed to provide enough, but because the vessel itself is not what you thought it was. The craving for more was never a signal that something was missing. It was the sound of a mind that had forgotten or never learned its own nature. The Zen tradition points at this with characteristic directness. When the monk Huineng was asked where a person should seek the Buddha, the awakened state, the condition of complete freedom, he answered without hesitation, not in temples, not in scriptures, not in the accumulation of spiritual merit or the performance of ritual. Look at the one who is asking. The freedom you are searching for is not ahead of you. It is not waiting on the other side of enough. It is the very awareness through which you are reading these words right now, before the commentary begins, before the wanting arises, before the mind layers its familiar narrative of lack over the bare, luminous fact of being here at all. This is what the monks in their silence were touching. This is what Thoreau found at the pond. This is what Marcus Aurelius was reaching for in the private darkness of his journals, surrounded by the weight of empire. Not the elimination of desire through force of will, but the recognition of something so fundamentally, irreducibly whole in the nature of awareness itself that the compulsive reaching for completion simply loses its grip, not because you conquered it, but because you finally saw through the premise that made it feel necessary. And this changes the texture of ordinary life in ways that are quiet but total. When you no longer need the moment to be different from what it is, you can finally be in it completely. When you no longer need the person in front of you to confirm your worth, you can finally see them clearly. When you no longer need the future to rescue you from the present, this ordinary, unremarkable, irreplaceable present, becomes something you could not have imagined from inside the wanting. It becomes enough. Not as a consolation, not as resignation, but as a recognition so simple and so complete that it carries the specific quality of something you always knew but somehow kept forgetting. The less you want, the freer your mind becomes. This is not a motivational slogan. It is a description of a neurological, philosophical, and deeply experiential reality, one that has been tested in the fire of human suffering across 25 centuries and has emerged each time, not diminished, but clarified. The wanting was never the path to the life you were reaching for. The wanting was the thing standing between you and the life that was already here. So here is what remains now that everything else has been said. You do not need to become a monk. You do not need to renounce your ambitions or empty your home or retreat from the world into silence. What you need, the only thing that has ever actually been needed, is a single sustained moment of honest seeing. A moment in which you look at the wanting clearly and without flinching and ask, is this mine or was it given to me?
Is this desire pointing towards something real, or is it the trained reflex of a mind that was never taught that it was already whole? That question, held with genuine curiosity rather than answered in haste, is the beginning of everything the Buddha spent a lifetime pointing toward. It is the crack in the wall through which the light enters. It is the moment the prisoner realizes that the door was never actually locked, and that on the other side of it, the world is exactly as it was, but experienced with a freedom so complete it feels, the first time you touch it, almost like coming home. The less you want, the freer your mind becomes. Now you know why.